Good morning, everyone. My name is Raymond Takiui Jr., and I am your MC for today. Some housekeeping rules before we begin today's session. If you're like me, I just saw a pop-up saying that the session is being recorded. So if you do not wish to be on camera, please turn your camera off if you don't want to be online. Please also, throughout the session, go ahead and mute your microphone. And if you have any questions, please write it in the chat box and it will be answered during our question and answer period. So welcome to our first Buddhist Study session, Buddhist Study Center spring session. This is a spring companion series to our long-standing BSC summer session. We'll begin today's program with an aspiration by Bishop and Acting Buddhist Study Center Director Eric Matsumoto.
Thank you, Raymond, and welcome, Reverend John Turner. For today's aspiration and opening reflection, thinking about the sharing by Reverend John Turner Sensei, which we're all looking forward to with great anticipation, and also in line to line it up with our Honpa Hongwanji Mission of Hawaii slogan for 2023, Sharing Joy Together, and our 2024 slogan, Sharing Nembutsu Moments. And in light of the fact that this year we are commemorating the birth of Shinran Shonin and also the establishment of Jodo Shinshu as a teaching, with Shinran Shonin's completing his first draft of his major writing, The True Teaching Practice and Realization of the Pure Land Way, which includes the Shoshinge, I'd like to share two quotes of Shinran Shonin, one of which is part of the preface to his hymn of True Shinjin and the Nembutsu, the other towards the end of his major work, and finally, a saying attributed to Shinran Shonin, which I think also captures the sentiment and joy of our speaker today. If you would please join me in Anjali Gasho for an opening reflection. Shinran Shonin shared quote, wishing to realize the Buddha's benevolence and to respond in gratitude to the Buddha's virtue, I realized the depth and vastness of the Buddha's benevolence and composed the following hymn, end quote. And quote, how joyous I am, my heart and mind being rooted in the Buddha Dharma ground of the universal vow, and my thoughts and feelings flowing within the Dharma ocean. I am deeply aware of the Tathagata's immense compassion. My joy grows ever fuller, my gratitude and indebtedness ever more compelling. Therefore, I have selected passages expressing the core of the Pure Land Way and gathered its essentials. May those who see and hear this work be brought to manifest Shinjin within the power of the vow and reveal the incomparable fruit of enlightenment in the land of peace, end quote. And finally, quote, if there is one person rejoicing in the Nembutsu, know that there are two. If there are two people rejoicing in the Nembutsu, know that there are three, for the other shall be I, Shinran, end quote. Namo Amida Butsu, Namo Amida Butsu, Namo Amida Butsu. Entrusting in all-inclusive wisdom and all-embracing compassion. Namanda, Namanda.
Thank you very much, Bishop. Do you have anything else you wanted to say?
No, I
Okay, sorry.
no, I didn't. But just thank you to the BSC program committee and all those involved for putting on today's program, and of course, welcome once again to our speaker, Reverend John Turner. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We are pleased to hear the journey of John Turner as he visited the Orange County Buddhist Church that fateful day in 1999. It is difficult to imagine the turn of events that ensued that made John and his family's life travel the Buddhist path. We are sitting here with great anticipation to hear his story. Reverend Turner received full ordination in 2012 and in 2017 became a full-time BCA or Buddhist Churches of America minister at the Orange County Buddhist Church in California. Reverend John is a co-founder and instructor of the Everyday Buddhist online educational program. He retired from a computer programming career after 35 years. So, Today's format will begin with a 30 to 40-minute presentation, followed by a 10 to 15-minute question and answer period. We'll then have a 5-minute bio break, followed by a second 30 to 40-minute presentation and a 10 to 15-minute question and answer period. Then Minister's Lay Assistant Vector Mar will briefly describe the Hawaii Minister Lay Assistant Program. And finally, Bishop-elect Reverend Umitani will comment on sharing the Dharma and finding the joy in the Dharma. So, without further ado, let us begin this morning's seminar with Reverend John Turner.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to say I'm very happy to be invited. I want to thank Dexter Marr, Carolyn Uchiyama, and Reverend Toshiyuki Umitani for meeting with me and giving me an outline and helping me along to be able to put together this deck of PowerPoint slides. Yeah, I'm going to begin with my journey, and then we could maybe study Shinran's journey a bit in the second half. So it all started for me, like they said. I first came to OCBC in 1999, but I actually was thinking about this. The first time we ever came to OCBC was actually in 1997. My wife was in college and she was taking a social diversity course. And they said that she needed to do something that was outside her comfort zone, but something she was always interested in. And we had drifted away from Christianity for many different reasons, but she really wanted to have some sort of spiritual life for our family. And I was also struggling with a lot of difficulty. My father passed away at 60 years old in 1993. And I didn't realize how ill he was. He was a chronic alcoholic. And I was very unhappy with the world between 1993 and 1999. So we came to OCBC in 1997 as a family for the Hanamatsuri Festival. We just Googled it on the internet. It just happened to be April. And we came, and the thing I remember most is we went into the Hondo, and all the lights were on, the candles were lit, the incense were burning. And I remember looking at the altar thinking, you know, I really want my life to feel the way the Naijin looks. Right? I would like to have a life that's bright and shiny and gold and quiet and peaceful and fragrant. And that really stuck with me. But after the festival, you know, I got busy and we went back to work and we had 2 young children and I kind of forgot about it. So I was still struggling. And I found this comic on the internet that kind of describes how I felt. I didn't really have any moral and ethical problems. I grew up a Protestant. I was pretty puritanical. I didn't really drink. I didn't smoke. I didn't party. I don't steal. So on a moral and ethical plane, I was successful by all measures. My work was good. I had a good family, but I just wasn't happy. There was something, I just had this deep sense that there was something missing in my life. And I felt like this dog. There has to be more to this life than just being a good boy. Because I tried to be a good boy and my dad died of alcoholism. So, you know, what was the point of being good? So that really threw my whole idea of a moral and ethical universe. Why be good if you're going to be punished? So I was really struggling with my worldview. So, 2 years go by. I'm at work in March of 1999, and I'm so desperate that I decided I needed to purchase a book on Buddhism. I remembered that feeling in the Hondo, and I went on the internet, Amazon, the early days of Amazon, and I looked around and I found this book, and it was in the top 10 best-selling list. It's by Lama Suradas, who happens to be a Tibetan Buddhist. And most of the books that new people read when they come to Buddhism are Tibetan, Zen, or Theravadan. So that's our entryway. And we kind of do what we call concept matching. I was looking for a founder like Jesus. So I gravitated towards a book with a statue on it of the Buddha. And he talks about awakening the Buddha within, I knew I needed to do something. And then it mentions these 8 steps to enlightenment. And I thought, well, that kind of sounds like the 10 Commandments. So, I might have bought this book for all the wrong reasons, but it was really helpful. And I'd like to explain a little bit of detail about this book. So I went and looked on my phone. Here's the actual receipt. So this is my 24th anniversary. I was at work at lunch, and at 11:51, March 16th, just a week or so ago, I purchased this book. I almost didn't, because I was not New Age. I'm not spiritual. I had a kind of a negative attitude that nothing would work. But luckily, I clicked my mouse. And I always make the joke that I had Amazon Prime, and it still took 2,500 years for Buddhism to arrive at my doorstep. So I got this book, and I started to read it, and it took my breath away. I realized that this is what I'd been looking for, that it wasn't the world that was messed up, it was me, that it was my problem. So sometimes people ask whether Buddhism is optimistic, or some people say it sounds a little pessimistic, but I think it's just realistic. I'd never had somebody talk to me as an adult and say, if it's everybody else's fault, it's your fault. You're the problem. And I immediately knew that was it. I knew that was it. And I told my wife, I think I finally found it. So I read this book. And I think one of the reasons why it resonated with me is Lama Surdas is what they call a modern Buddhist convert, just like me. He grew up, I think, Jewish in his case, but he converted to Buddhism after college. And there was an event in his life, like my father's death, that really woke him up and really got him to focus. So I think the recipe for finding Buddhism is you have a tragedy in your life. And I used to think my tragedy was unique, but I think everybody has a tragedy in their life. But I think a lot of us kind of move it aside and they push it away. But this thing with my dad, I couldn't shake. So I had a tragedy just like everybody else, but I couldn't shake it. I couldn't cover it up with money or concerts or vacations. And then, so I was ripe to hear the teachings. So I thought this book was the greatest book that was ever written, but I think part of it was I was just raw and ready to hear the Buddha's teachings. And then the next thing, it has to be available. There's a lot of luck involved that I found this book on the internet. So I wanted to talk about Lama Surdas a little bit. His name was Jeffrey Miller. And in 1970, during the Kent State massacre with the National Guard at the protest against the Vietnam War, there was a Jeffrey Miller who was an American student at Kent State who was killed by the Ohio National Guard. So his namesake. There was another person named Jeffrey Miller, and he was killed. He had been protesting against the invasion of Cambodia and the presence of the National Guard on the Kent State campus. So he started getting phone calls. People thought he died. And he's like, no, it's not this Jeffrey Miller. It's another Jeffrey Miller. He wasn't Lama Surdas yet. That wasn't his homeo yet. And then this one is even a more amazing coincidence. He says that his 19-year-old college freshman friend, Allison Krauss, was also shot at the same time on the campus of Kent State, along with the other Jeffrey Miller. He said, I had a rough awakening. It led me to conclude that fighting for peace via radical politics was a contradiction in terms, and I wanted to become peaceful and be peaceful. So he decides he wants to learn more, not earn more, and this changes the entire trajectory of his life. So the organizing principle for this book was the Eightfold Path. And I remember him saying that it was my problem, but I got my book out. I still have it. It's all yellow. It's a sacred text to me. And I wanted to make sure the story I'm telling you actually happened and it's not romanticizing. But earlier in the book, he talks about we're all Buddhas, and he talks about the Four Noble Truths. And this is the part that got me within the first three pages of the book. So he said to me, one Westerner convert to another, as Westerners, this isn't how we've been conditioned to think. We keep looking outside for answers. We look for lovers, for friends, for parents, authorities, and even children to answer needs that they can't possibly fulfill. We have fantasies about career, romance, friendship, and intimacy. We are so full of fantasies about the past and the future. Often, we don't want to let go of these fantasies because we fear that doing so means giving up on life. But that's not how it works. In truth, unrealistic expectations tarnish our appreciation of life and weigh down the buoyancy of the present moment. Then he goes on to say, don't we all tend to think mainly in terms of the gratification of our desires and securing our place in the world? Haven't we all been conditioned to place primary emphasis on a persona or how we appear? Our common languages abound with phrases about projecting a good image, the emphasis on how you appear to yourself as well as how you appear to others. In order to get what you want, don't we all seek security, safety, and reassurance? We're often told, don't just stand there, do something. And we do. We do many things. When we are involved in unsatisfying relationships, we believe that our solutions will be found in different relationships. When we have jobs that make us angry and resentful, we believe that new jobs will give us what we want. When we're unhappy with our surroundings, we believe we can resolve our unhappiness by changing locales. Then when our problems refuse to go away, we complain that we're stuck and look for ways to get moving. We take this kind of logic even further when we reduce life to an ongoing competition, trained and conditioned to believe that life is about achievement, about winning, losing, and self-assertion. We put much of our energy into momentary solutions. It's no wonder so many of us feel alienated, alone, exhausted, cynical, and disheartened. So this is what took my breath away. It challenged all my life strategies. And what he's basically talking about is a life of self-power, of being in control, trying to attain things you want through your own efforts. And there's a real lack of humility and gratitude. And so this kind of language really, really helped me. So I read this book. And then I just found this, this is on Instagram, this meme my wife sent me. I thought this was me if I was a dog. It says, my dog, after eating my book, Awakening the Buddha Within. You go to the ocean and you look at the infinite reality before you and you feel humbled in gratitude. So like I said, I read this book in March of 1999. And then I read a Zen book. And then I read a Theravadan book. And then the week after Mother's Day in May, as was mentioned by Raymond, we attended the Orange County Buddhist Church for the first time, I thought. I Googled Buddhism. What I did is I Googled Orange County Buddhist temples, and there weren't any. Oh, no, this is, oh, how did I? Yeah, I couldn't find any. But when I put in church, then OCBC popped up because OCBC uses the word church in their title. And my wife called the church and Reverend Harada answered the phone. And I thought this was like, you know, calling Nepal and the Dalai Lama answers. Reverend Harada answered the phone and he said, sure, come on in. So we got the kids in the car and my daughter to this day thought we were going to Disneyland. I told her we were going somewhere really special and fun. And we went up Beach Boulevard and she thought we were going to Disneyland. She loves OCBC, but it ain't Disneyland. So she was only 5 years old. So she was kind of disappointed. But that same day, my wife signed us up and made us sustaining members at the Orange County Buddhist Church. And the word membership to me sounded like being at Costco. I thought, well, if you pay for a year, you kind of have to go, was my thinking. And that was my wife's thinking too. We didn't understand what membership meant. So we continued going. And the reason my wife did this is she was really worried that I'd wiggle off the hook. She really thought this was something I needed to dedicate my life to. I needed some serious help. And then I remember too, before we came in May, I kept reading Dogen, Zen Master Dogen saying, you really need to go get a teacher. It's vital that you find a Sangha and that you find a teacher. So before we went in May, I was what is called a nightstand Buddhist. You read books at night in the privacy of your own home, and you keep it kind of a secret. I read an article once by one LGBTQ person, a gay man. He said that coming out as gay was easier for him than coming out as Buddhist to his family. So I was very lucky. My whole family came to OCBC with me, and all my relatives supported me. None of them knew or had any idea what Buddhism was about, but they said that I seemed more relaxed. I was less impatient. I was less angry. And they said, whatever you're doing in Buddhism, keep doing it. You know, we can tell a difference in you. So I was really lucky. I had no pushback about, you know, going to hell when I die or rejecting God, or I never got any of that kind of feedback from my relatives. And my wife and I and the children, we were all unified, and we attended in person. So in some ways, I was very lucky. We've had a lot of people come to our temple where one of the spouses isn't happy about it. And sometimes they'll go Catholic one weekend and Buddhist the other weekend, but it's not sustainable. And so we've lost a lot of members in that way. The other thing I wanted to talk about a little bit, people like me. So I know a lot about the modern Buddhist converts. I don't know a lot about how we keep our membership strong and not have people drift away. So when we talk about membership and we talk about attracting people, oftentimes there's two conversations going on. How can we attract new people, the general public, and how do we keep our young children engaged in the temple and not have them bleed out? Now, one theory I have is that the Yonsei have the same worldview and the same kind of American values that the general public has. So it's two different groups, but I think they're both searching for the same message. So, you know, we have two different conversations, but I think the same solution would likely work for both. So that's kind of good news. But I'm always kind of aware, you know, which group we're talking about. You might use different techniques to attract each group, but I think the messaging and the language and the way we present the tradition, I think would appeal to both equally. So Reverend Harada asked me in 2000 if I'd like to be part of this new pilot program called the Minister's Assistance Program. And I didn't really, there's a lot of different roles at the temple, and being on the board is super important. There's a lot of activities on the board that are just as vital as the minister. You know, you know, they're both equally important. But for me, I'm not an admin person. I'm not good at administrative. I have no financial background. I'm not good at keeping books. So, and I was really, my family came to OCBC, and this is part of being a convert. We only were interested in the religious part. I didn't really appreciate the social part of it. And that's a mistake, right? Because I now appreciate that the social activity of the Sangha is practice itself. And so one of the things that happen to new people that come to your temple is they're looking for a true Buddhism. And they've only read popular culture and New Age books. And it took me a long time to appreciate Jodo Shinshu in its own context. Like, there was no statue of the historical Buddha anywhere on the campus. That kind of made me nervous. We weren't meditating when I first came to OCBC. I thought the Anjali Mudra was praying. They had an organ. They would play an organ during service. That's really triggering for somebody who comes from a Christian background. And some of the gathas we sang used words like faith and salvation. And so I had to work my way through that. But I also had to begin to appreciate that, well, I think the other thing that happens to new people is we're looking for monastic Buddhism. We're looking for gurus. And so Jodo Shinshu, it took me a long time to appreciate the fact that I think we need to lean into this. that this is an everyday form of Buddhist practice, that we can achieve the same understanding as the Dalai Lama through listening to the teachings. And so, at everydaybuddhist.org, we're, rather than kind of pushing that message off to the side and trying to appeal to the kind of the caricature of Buddhism in American culture, we're leaning into that message. It's something that you can use every day. It's something practical. Your spiritual life and your secular life merge. And rather than trying to keep the everyday away from you while you meditate, you could say, we let in mindfulness into our everyday life. So instead of trying to control our minds and letting go of things, instead, we're opening up and letting things in and having mindfulness and ultimate reality interrupt our minds. And so it's a different approach. So I became an MA. It was a pilot program. I went through a lot of training. It was very gradual. Reverend Harada was really good at giving me the next assignment that I was ready for. So, he would have me speak once every 4 months, and then maybe once every 3 months. And then it would get to the point where he would say, can you give a Dharma talk tomorrow morning, right? So he was slowly getting me to be able to speak without 4 months notice. I don't need 4 months to write a Dharma talk anymore. So then in 2004, it became an official sanctioned Buddhist Churches of America program. And I was the first MA that was certified. So, you become an MA in training, and then you reach a certain level of capability and ability, and you become certified. That was 2004. And then 2005, I enrolled at the Institute of Buddhist Studies, and I did everything online while I was working. And like was mentioned, I was able to graduate in 2010. And then I received Tokudo in 2010. And then 2 years later, Kyoshi, like they mentioned. And then I went from a voluntary minister. In 2013, I became a part-time minister. And then 2017, I became a full-time minister and received Kaikyoshi. So one thing that happens with the MA program that's a little bit confusing, I think, is there's lots of different levels. And there's also 3 silos. So there's your, there's kind of the education part, where you are in your education. Then there's where you are in your ordination. And then there's where you are in your employment. And it's nice if they all kind of go up maybe evenly. But for me, I completed my master's degree before I even was ordained. So, and for me, that was good. I was highly trained when I went to Tokudo. And then I think my ordination and my appointment were kind of in sync, but that's part of the balancing act when you're training MAs. And so what we do is we try to have MAs that are what we call 5-tool players. It's important that they can chant. They understand etiquette and ritual. They can give good Dharma talks. They can do adult discussion and greet with new people. They can go out and be visiting speakers if called upon. So, all these are part of the minister training. And there was no commitment. You could go to whatever level you felt comfortable. When Reverend Harada asked me to be an MA in 2000, I never in my wildest imagination thought that I was going to be a minister. Like, I think that took, 10 or 12 years of practicing before that seemed like a possibility. Like, maybe I could do that. So it's almost like it's an open path without any promises or any commitment. And you go and you do what you feel comfortable with. So for me, it was a very gentle, easy, soft landing in a glider. The joke I make is I became a minister because I just never said no. I kind of trusted Reverend Harada. If he asked me to do something, I had faith that he knew I was ready. I mean, he was monitoring me and kind of knew not to give me something that was too much. And so I kind of trusted him the way a basketball player would trust a coach. And so it really helped me. I know the Hawaii Kyodan doesn't use the word practice a lot, but when I use the word practice, I'm talking about immersion. Like when you go into the ocean and as you go out, you begin to float, you realize that you have an inherent buoyancy, right? We're just a bag of skin with a bunch of water in us. And there's an equivalency between the ocean and our bodies. There's an intimacy. And as we go into the ocean, we're not practicing to be buoyant. We're not earning or learning the technique of floating. It's just that as you go out, you begin to feel a little bit more confident, a little bit more at home. You begin to stop struggling, and you really begin to float when you relax. And so that's the way I thought about the MA program for me. I was just kind of stepping deeper and deeper into the ocean. For me, it's practice, but it was immersive, right? It's not a self-power practice. And the other thing that I've learned from just recently is I used to really like silent sitting meditation, but I never could really quiet my mind, but it looked like I could. I really have found that the meditation practice for me is chanting. That's the only thing that focuses my mind. When I come out of it, I feel rejuvenated, I feel connected, I feel peaceful. So this is another thing we're kind of emphasizing on everydaybuddhist.org, is leaning into this idea of having a chanting meditation practice in your life. So I think rather than kind of coming at the general public in an apologetic way, like not leading with our message or our brand through everydaybuddhist.org, I think it's a mistake. We're embracing the Jodo Shinshu, Shinran Shonin brand of the Buddhist path. And I think American audiences are tired of struggling and fighting and working so hard. And I think they're looking at a way of life where you could exhale. And that when you do that, you realize everything's not your fault. You don't feel guilty anymore. Like with my father, I don't feel guilty. I don't feel like a victim. I don't feel like it's my fault. Most of life is beyond our control. And my father's death, rather than looking at it as good or bad, the value I got from Jodo Shinshu is it made me realize that his life had a great meaning. There's a lot of meaning in my father's life and death. And he's much more than the diagnosis of an alcoholic, right? He probably worked harder to be a good father than I do. He got up at 5 a.m. and cooked me breakfast every morning before school. He did that carrying this baggage of a disease of alcoholism. And so, I really have a much more sense of my father kind of in the big picture, not just focusing on the drinking, which was one aspect. And his death is probably the most important point in my life. It pivoted me away from 80-hour work weeks and becoming a manager or at work, and it pivoted me to a spiritual practice. And so, for that, I will be eternally grateful. So I really think there's a lot of value in Shinran's teachings. Some people think he sounds a bit too negative, but after living through COVID and the political problems and the Ukraine-Russian war, I'm beginning to think he was just being realistic. I think Shinran's times actually line up with ours right now. It's tough out. A lot of people are searching for answers, and they're really concerned and frustrated. And I think Buddhism offers us a way to be happy without changing the world, right? Without waiting for the world to change. How can I be grounded and peaceful and find an equilibrium in my life? And I mean, I always tell people I feel like Lou Gehrig. I'm the luckiest man in the world to be able to found this tradition. And I didn't mention this, but we actually found OCBC twice. The first time for the festival, the second time to visit in May of 1999. And I kept telling to my wife that address, 909 South Dale, that sounds familiar to me. Where have I heard that before? And when we got there that Sunday in May, we realized, oh my gosh, this is the same church that we went to Hanamatsuri to 2 years earlier. So it's really quite amazing. We actually found this temple twice. And then the thing I think that made me stick at OCBC is I didn't know there were different schools of Buddhism. Like I didn't know, I thought that it was a monolith. And it was called the Orange County Buddhist Church. So, I didn't know there were different schools of Buddhism. I didn't know this was Jodo Shinshu. I didn't even really know it was Japanese. I never heard of Shinran Shonin before. So I think what made me stay, even though I wasn't quite sure what Namo Amida Butsu meant, and I didn't understand why we were saying it, I didn't really like to say it in the beginning, but I felt welcome. I felt peaceful. I felt calm. And I also noticed once in a while, there was a Sunday or two that I wouldn't come to OCBC because I had something to do. And I noticed my work week was worse when I didn't come to OCBC on Sunday. And when I came on Sunday, it was better. So after a while, I quit thinking about doctrine and I started to accept the fact that I felt better. I had a better week. I wasn't as anxious the week after a Sunday at OCBC. The other thing I did as a newcomer is because I'm Protestant, I thought Buddhism existed in books. So I did a lot of studying and a lot of reading, and I didn't really like the rituals because I'm not Catholic, I'm Protestant. So I like to chant, but a lot of the other things, it didn't resonate with me. And when I went to IBS, one of my professors told me there's two things that are going to happen to someone like me. She said, you're either going to drop out of Buddhism because it doesn't touch your heart. You're just reading for academic and intellectual knowledge. And so you end up quitting. Or you begin to have it touch your heart and you begin to appreciate the camaraderie. You begin to appreciate the Sangha and it becomes a feeling and an emotion for you. And then you'll stay. And you're rightly settled at that point. So these are the kind of things I think you have to be aware of when new people come, right? They've read popular books, they've read New Age self-help books, they're looking for gurus, they think meditation is Buddhism. That's it. If you don't meditate, you're not Buddhist. And so I think knowing this, I think maybe if we kind of lean into that and explain it up front, it probably would have helped me a little bit because I kind of had to figure it out all for myself. So we've been trying to do that at OCBC.
Okay, Reverend Turner, I think we are a little bit ahead of schedule, but I think we can move into our question and answer period. So I think Dexter is going to be handling this part, but if anyone out there has any questions for Reverend Turner, please go ahead and put that in the chat, and we'll go ahead and get those answered for you. It was a very interesting talk as far as your journey into ministry. Did you have any suggestions as far as maybe how Hawaii could develop more of a minister's program? Right now, we have certified ministerly assistants, um, but I mean, I guess, how do you think that we could maybe encourage more people to enter like a minister's assistant program?
Well, one thing we do is we kind of picking the minister's assistants is important. So my experience is that becoming an MA is not a voluntary process. It's by invitation only. And so what we try to do is we try to watch the members who tend to come, like today, for instance, they come to seminars like this. They come to special services. They seem to be the ones that are already pretty motivated to listen to the Dharma. So they seem to be pretty engaged with the tradition and seem to be pretty serious about attendance. And so we usually ask them if they'd like to help out, very gradually. And also we ask a lot of people, and everybody's very busy. So many people say they're unable to, but we try to look for candidates, and we usually give it a year or two, especially if it's a new person. We wait a year or two to make sure they're really committed to the Buddhist practice. And then we might ask them if they would like to write an essay for the church newspaper. Everyday Buddhist has a blog. And so we would say, would you like to write that up? And we'll use it as a blog, 500 words. All you have to do is write 500 words. And then the other thing we do is we also sometimes have a Sangha connection service where we'll ask, for instance, we have a member who's been attending now for quite some time. He's married. He's an LGBTQ person. He's married to his husband. He's a psychiatrist or psychologist at the University of California, Los Angeles, UCLA, my alma mater, but they lost to Gonzaga. But he does research and teaches, and he's going to do a Dharma talk in the next couple of weeks from the Gay Gene. But he's going to come and talk about the psychology of practice and the psychology of Buddhism, and how do we deal with anxiety? How do we deal with stress? Why do we have certain triggers? And so this is the why of Buddhism. It's not history, it's not doctrine, but it's what value does Jodo Shinshu provide you today in your everyday life? And a lot of Americans are very pragmatic. They're looking for something, a tool they can use. And on Everyday Buddhist, it's good, but one of our younger members said, I really like it, but there's a lot of history. There's a lot of history. So we've been leaning into this idea from Reverend Bishop Harada to try to really hit on the why, the benefits of practice. And so, he's somebody that we've asked and said, maybe think about it, but maybe you might like to be a minister's assistant someday. Maybe just think about it. You don't have to answer us today. And he said, yeah, I am interested. And so we have feelers out to a lot of possible candidates. And, we try to make it very casual, no pressure. They set their own work level that they're comfortable with. And so that's how we tend to pull people in. And sometimes we hit a home run. We have one MA who is going to be certified in July, and he's at IBS now, and he's going to go to Tokudo in December. So, we might ask 9 people, and one of them is going to be ordained. But, we just keep asking, and people surprise us. And so we really don't have a timeline or goals or, levels of achievement that they have to reach or anything like that. We just try to gradually ease them in. And usually they come in with the talent that they're most proficient at. So, if they're really good speakers, we ask them to speak. If they're really good writers, we ask them to write. And then what we try to do is we try to build them up so they're balanced, because we want them to be good at writing and talking and chanting. And it's important that they can do all those skills, because it's hard for me as a minister to make assignments if I have to remember, like, oh yeah, you can't chant and you can't talk and you don't know etiquette. So we really do want somebody who's kind of well-rounded. And then we just kind of say, why don't you try the Jodo Shinshu correspondence course and see how you like it? And if you really like it and you found it enjoyable, one day maybe you could go to IBS. And so we just kind of give them, we just plant seeds of opportunity with them. But we ask a lot of people say no, some people drop out. but the people that stay are really valuable to the temple. And they give the minister a broader reach. You know, a minister can do a lot more if he has support from an MA group. And so when you ask people to be an MA, you're really building a team. You want to have MAs that get along with one another. The minister, they should be people the minister enjoys working with. It should be enjoyable. And you want MAs that are, you know, gentle and not harsh. The MAs I don't like to invite are the ones that think they already know, you know, like they're not coachable. You want to invite MAs who are open to suggestion and open to training and realize there's a lot to learn. So I think the art is identifying the right candidates, easing them in, and training them properly. So we meet with our MAs, you know, once a month on Zoom. We train them every Sunday. They're running, we have meditation service at OCBC Sunday mornings before family service and Wednesday night on Zoom. So we ask them to lead the service. And, you know, you could start out on Zoom, right? They do it from home. All they have to do is chant and give a Dharma talk for 5 minutes. And so, you know, these are like less formal, you know, it's a smaller stadium, right? It's not in the Hondo. It's not at a major service. It's at a small Zoom mindfulness meeting. And so that's how we, you know, gradually bring them in. And I tell them, you only have to do your first Dharma talk once. So I'm a Zen master. It's really scary the first time, but you only have to do it for the first time once. And then after that, it gets easier and easier. Oh, and the other thing is we don't worry about diversity. I thought, well, I have to ask one male, one female, one Japanese person, one white person. You know, we ask the people that are qualified and available. We don't worry so much about quotas or, you know, if like last time at LCVC, we asked 3 women because they were the ones that were available and interested and motivated. And that's great. Thanks for putting everydaybuddhist.org out.
Yeah, so I put that the link for Everyday Buddhist in the chat. So if you guys want to check out that website, you can go ahead and do that. I'll turn it over to Dexter. I didn't see any questions in the chat, but if there's anyone that has any questions or anything like that, you can either input it into the chat, or if I guess if you want to unmute, you can also speak as well. Just keep in mind that the session today is being recorded, so it will be part of the recording.
So one person, I think this might be Michael Nishimoto, maybe, asked, could you expand on social activities as practice? I think when you come into Buddhism from the outside, you have this idea that only meditation, only chanting, only listening to the Dharma is Buddhist practice. That's authentic. And doing festivals and pulling weeds and washing the windows of the Hondo, that's not practice. That's social activity. And so new people bring this dichotomy in their mind. But, you know, since I'm a full-time minister now, I'm always at OCBC every day. And, you know, I see a real selfless, dedicated Sangha who, you know, the Hondo is the most important building in their life. And they want it to look good. And it's the Buddha's home. And so, you know, they give up their time and they dedicate themselves to the upkeep of our Buddhist practice. And so, you know, working at festivals, I think is that way. So I've really matured over time, and I kind of appreciate that the humility and the gratitude that's being expressed by our volunteers at OCBC are what keep the temple running. And I think sometimes we focus a bit too much on monetary donations. A lot of people are donating, you know, vast amount of time so that, you know, our temple can remain open. And they take the Dharma very seriously. Oh, there's a question about what made me feel welcome and calm. Well, the first thing is the first time we came, OCBC has a habit of announcing visitors. And when they announced, they said, today we have 2 new guests today, or a new family. We'd like to welcome John Turner and his wife, Linda, and his son, Teague, and his daughter, Emily. And if you'd please stand up, we'd like to recognize you. And everybody clapped. And I was I was so happy. I felt like I just won the Oscar. Like I just won the Oscar. It made me feel so welcome, and it made me feel seen and appreciated. So I really appreciated that immensely. And then another thing we have that's in our brand is the importance of Sangha. So a lot of other Buddhist schools don't really emphasize this as much, but the Sangha made me feel welcome. Ministers are often very busy, but that made me feel very welcome to be part of a family. And then the other thing that made me feel welcome is Reverend Miyagi came off the Naijin for the first Dharma talk I ever heard. And he went out the Hondo doors and did a triple jump down the aisle of straight ahead at Amida Buddha. And I didn't really understand exactly what was going on, but I think he was saying you can't jump any farther than you can jump. He didn't really explain it in words, but he acted it out physically. I've never seen a Christian minister, come off the altar and do a triple jump running from the front door of the church. So my eyes were like this big, and I thought, this is so much different than Christianity. I was just so happy. The ministers, Jodo Shinshu ministers, are very friendly and warm. They're not intimidating. I used to be afraid to talk to a minister because they would see through me, or I don't know, they were judging me. But I never felt that way with the Jodo Shinshu minister. It's much different than a Zen master. It's very warm and welcoming and nurturing. You're not challenged. You're not, I don't know. It's just you're accepted as you are, and that made me feel very welcome. I also want to tell you a story. We have a Fuken where it's a minister's continuing ed, and we had the Reverend Harada of the Tendai tradition. He was the American Tendai bishop, and he gave us a long talk. I really liked it, and he said he really didn't know anything about Shinran, and we were all shocked. But this is very common in Japanese Buddhism. Each school has their own master, and they don't really know a lot about each other's masters. And he explained, though, that Tendai was actually really happy that Honen left, Dogen left, Shinran left, because they see it as their coaching tree. They're actually really proud that these other traditions branched out of Tendai, that they were the genesis of this new creative Kamakura schools of Buddhism. So I thought that was very interesting. The thing that he said that really got me, though, is at the end of his talk, we raised our hand and he asked for questions. And we threw him this softball question because we wanted him to tell us how great we are and we wanted to be complimented. We asked him, how does he feel about American Buddhism? How does he feel about the state of Buddhism in America? And we all thought he was going to say, we're doing a great job, and we're up and coming, and just keep doing what you're doing. But he said, like Zen Master Dogen, he said, I'm not very optimistic about Buddhism in America. I don't think it's going well. And I was all deflated. And he said, I think the problem is that he notices, and this is coming from a monastic, that Americans don't appreciate the importance of Sangha. We appreciate the founder as if he's Jesus, and we appreciate the texts as if it's the Bible, but we don't appreciate the Sangha. And he said, until American Buddhists begin to appreciate the importance of Sangha in our practice, he doesn't have a bright and shiny outlook for Buddhism in the United States. So, I kind of took that to heart. And that's what we kind of do at everydaybuddhist.org. We practice together. During COVID, we couldn't chant together. And my wife's a yoga instructor. They had to do yoga on Zoom. There's something missing, right? You could use the word merit transfer, but something goes on when we practice together, when we chant together, when we do yoga together, when we sit in meditation together as a group. There's something happening there. and it's more than the sum of the parts. And so these are the kinds of messages that we're leaning into at everydaybuddhist.org. I think that's what makes us unique, and I think we should lean in with it. And I think we should, I don't think we should be like, oh, well, we meditate too, you know, because we used to do that. I think we used to be like, well, we'll talk about Shinran later. We'll talk about other power later, you know, let's get them in first. But I'm beginning to think maybe we should just lead with what makes us unique. We did a SWOT. What is it called? Strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And we have strengths, and there's an opportunity, and you want to line those up. And that's what we've been doing. So we do try to make it sound contemporary. We try to take a traditional, authentic form of Buddhism, and we're trying to verbalize it and sell it and market it and present it in a way that's contemporary, but still authentic. And that's it's a hard road to hoe, because you're balancing tradition and contemporary at the same time. So like as a minister, I try to really make my talks accessible to new people, but I don't want to be a caricature. I'm not a comedian. You know, I want it to be authentic, but I want it to resonate with people. And so I try to use everyday language. I stay away from all Christian words. That's another pet peeve of mine. I never use the word salvation. I never use the word pray. I never use the word faith. It's too confusing. And I spend my whole time explaining that I don't really mean that. What I really mean is this. It's just, so, you know, that's my style. But, you know, I think we should own our brand, and we should align our strengths with the opportunities that are out in the general public today. And I think we should move forward with confidence.
Reverend Turner, in Hawaii, probably more so than on the mainland, our temples tend to be, you know, we have legacy members, you know, those that, you know, they came into Jodo Shinshu through their families. And so it's a kind of a generational, you know, type of a thing, you know, where they, you know, just accept, you know, kind of the Jodo Shinshu perspective, you know, without, you know, kind of the need to study a lot. You know, they don't have the questions as to, you know, how can this be true? They accept that it's true. You know, from your perspective as a convert, you know, Buddhist, and especially one in a, you know, predominantly, you know, Christian society there in Orange County, do you think there's a different way of presenting the Dharma, you know, for, you know, the convert kind of new people that we're trying to attract versus our legacy, you know, members and families, you know, and you know, the legacy Buddhists in Hawaii include not only just the Jodo Shinshu, but all the other forms of Buddhism, you know, because it kind of gets all mushed together and mixed up, you know, so there's a you kind of a general Buddhist, you know, perspective, outlook, you know, versus our, you know, those that are practicing as, you know, one of the Christian faiths.
Right. I think at our temple, we've been kind of lucky that the older traditional Nisei and older Sansei have kind of come along with us in using kind of a modern everyday language to explain Shinran. One of the problems I had when I came to the church is that Shinran is unique, and he is amazing, and he is a giant as a Buddhist thinker, but sometimes he gets isolated away from Mahayana Buddhism. And so what we try to do is we try to explain Shinran within a Mahayana context, you know, within a Buddhist context, because a lot of times it sounds Christian to people. Now that's new people, but we try to honor the tradition, but trying to use maybe Buddhist language and Buddhist concepts. because some of the phrases that we use, and a lot of this has to do with translation. When I first came here, and it was probably because I hadn't developed my ear yet, but I thought the Pure Land was a place like heaven, and I thought Amida Buddha was a god. And I'm not saying it's wrong or anything. I'm just saying that I kind of got this from Reverend Harada. I'm trying to be pragmatic. That we are in a very Christian country, at least in California, and those kinds of words throw people off. And I used to wonder if the minister meant it that way or not. Like, does he think it's a heaven, or is he talking metaphorically? Or, and I kind of decided it doesn't matter so much what the minister means. It's how it's received by the Sangha. It's how it's heard. So, we're experimenting with language, to try to find words that, a lot of the words that were translated into Christian terms is because those are the religious words in America. And if you're translating, a Buddhist religion into English, you're going to start picking up those Christian words. And so it's a struggle. But I think we've been very lucky at OCBC and at the Vista Buddhist Temple. The older Sangha members kind of gave a green light and said, you do you reach these new people. It's important that we open up our tradition. And so they've been very supportive. They haven't ever said, that's too, woo-woo, or that's too out there or anything. They understand the need, and I think they see it as a way of kind of revitalizing the message for a new audience.
Welcome back, everyone. This is the final part of the spring session. Let's see. We had a couple questions, as was mentioned earlier, that we're going to put on in a parking lot for now until the next Q&A session. But for now, we'll move on to the second part. Our founder, Shinran Shonin, referred to his followers as equal companions and fellow travelers, or ondogyo in the Dharma. Shinran taught us that without exception, we are all brothers and sisters embraced by Amida Buddha's wisdom and compassion. Reverend Turner will now share Shinran's life as a monk and a lay teacher. Shinran's experience serves as a foundation for the lay minister programs in Hawaii and the Buddhist Churches of America. Reverend Turner?
All right, thank you very much. I may go a little faster this time. I got a lot of slides. So I thought I'd give you this little diagram to kind of show graphically his travels in his life. He's born in Kyoto in 1173. At the age of 29, age of 9 years old, his parents, something happens in his family. We'll go into this later, but it was either death or the father left the family. It's not really clear. But at 9 years old, he was orphaned, and he goes to Mount Hiei and practices as a monk, very, very harsh and rigorous practices for 20 years. And I think he was very honest with himself, like I was trying to be about meditation. I meditated for a long time, and I don't think anything really changed. Not in a bad way, like not negative, but I'm just not sure that there was a fundamental change of my thinking. And I think Shinran was very honest with himself that these monastic practices, they just didn't last a long time. They didn't have legs. And so at 29, he leaves Mount Hiei, like we talked about with Dogen and Honen, and he went to his teacher Honen. And then at age 35, this whole Namo Amida Butsu Nembutsu Pure Land movement becomes banned, and they all get exiled, and two of them actually get executed. So this is like serious business, right? This is hardcore stuff. Honen is exiled. Shinran is exiled north to Echigo, and it's on the coast. And it looks like he lived there for 5 to 6 years. And this is where he met finally for the first time, like real people, like actual real people who fish, who farm, who are struggling in life. And I think this was a real eye-opener for him. I think he saw that they had a sense of impermanence and other power maybe he'd never seen at Mount Hiei. My grandfather was a farmer, and he seemed to be in tune with nature, in tune with life. One year the well broke and he wasn't able to water his orchard. And my grandmother was going hysterical. And my grandpa just said, we're going to have a guy come out, and if he gets it fixed, we'll have a crop this year. And if it isn't, we won't. And there's nothing I can do about it. It's just like the weather. There's nothing I can do about it. And he always stayed very calm. And so I think he met people like this, like Raymond read, everyday people. And then from 40 to 60, he moves to Kanto, and he develops a Sangha, and he writes, letters and is developing a community. And then at 60, he heads back to Kyoto to finish his Kyogyo Shinsho. And this is where his daughter, Kakushini, comes and lives with him for the remainder of his life in Kyoto. So here we have the dates, the rough dates of this loop of his life. So I was going to go over I like to see things, I'm very visual, I like to see things in writing. So we're going to go through a timeline with examples. The only thing that's really bad about this timeline is nothing in here is about the women in his life. Like, where did his mom go? When did he get married? When were the children born? So I found that a little, I don't know how you can leave that out of his timeline. Shinran was a man. He was married. He had kids. He was a family man. It's vital that that's part of the story. He wasn't a monastic. When he said he was stubble-headed, he meant that he was rejecting monastic Buddhism. And, he's the first monk to be like disrobed, defrocked, and be married publicly. These were very bold moves on his part. So as Sensei mentioned earlier, he was born in 1173 and 2023, that's 850 years ago. So in 2023, we're celebrating this dual event, his birth, and also the 800th anniversary of when the Jodo Shinshu teachings became codified. And I tried to look that up in the collected works and I couldn't find it. I guess somebody somewhere just decided that at 50 years old, that's when he kind of published or finished his first edition of his major opus, magnum opus, the collected works, the Kyogyo Shinsho. So he's born in 1173. In 1175, Honen begins the Jodo Shu sect. This idea that saying Namo Amida Butsu alone is enough for realization on the Buddhist path. And Honen is 40 years Shinran's senior. So in 1173, when Shinran was born, Honen was 40 years old. So that's a huge disparity in age. So they weren't peers, right? I mean, he must have looked up to Honen as a very devout and important teacher in his life. So when Shinran's about 9 years old, as we mentioned, something tragic happens to his family. He becomes an orphan, and at 9 years old, he becomes a Buddhist monk on Mount Hiei. And this is why at OCBC, we have Tea Sarana for our 9-year-old Dharma school students. It's kind of, reenacting this importance of 9 years of age. So in 1201, when Shinran's about 29, he gives up the monastic practice. He comes down off of Mount Hiei and he begins to follow the teachings of Honen Shonin. So I think I wrote this down here on my paper. Shinran would be 29 and Honen would be 69. And then in 1207, like on the chart, the Nembutsu practice is banned by the government, and Shinran is exiled and defrocked. And then in 1211, he's pardoned. And so, you know, he's no longer in exile. So, and I got this from the Higashi Hongwanji Mission of Hawaii. So I'm using your works. In 1201, at the age of 29, the course of Shinran's life changed as a result of his encounter with the great master Honen Shonin. Honen was teaching the Nembutsu, a simple practice which all could perform, but which also had deep roots in the Buddhist religious tradition. So this is the part I think is important. You know, Namo Amida Butsu, saying names, chanting, is this vocal practice of sound is at least 50% of Buddhism, all the way back to India. Mantras, this is just basic Buddhism. There's nothing odd or weird about chanting Namo Amida Butsu. Now, it might be weird to a convert Buddhist, but this is just basic Buddhist practice. So, you know, it's important that what Honen did that was unique is he made it the only practice. That's what Honen did. He said, you only have to do this. You don't have to do anything else. Before this time, this was complementary. It was an additional practice you could do. It was an auxiliary practice. And Honen said, no, this is it. You could just do this. And so we have Namo Amida Butsu as a powerful phrase that causes our mind to focus and connect with something beyond ourselves. And that realization that we're in touch with something beyond ourselves can also be a statement of profound gratitude, that you feel finite, but really you're part of something much bigger than you are. Namo Amida Butsu, you could say is the sound of a wave crashing into the ocean. That the wave isn't the ocean, but it's wrong to say that the ocean is outside the wave, right? The ocean is the essence of a wave. And most of us live our lives on the surface of the water. We live a very shallow life. But when we say Namo Amida Butsu, we're touching this inner truth that we're all accepted, just like all waves, whose essence is that of the infinite ocean. So we talked a bit about the government banning. In 1207, the government issued a proclamation banning the teaching of Nembutsu. Honen was exiled to Tosa in Shikoku, and Shinran to Echigo, present Niigata Prefecture. Teacher and disciple were never to meet again. So, you know, the life story of Shinran is like a historical novel or something. It's really tragic that I didn't realize they never actually were in each other's presence ever again because of this exile. And then we mentioned Eshini. This was another thing I didn't know. When we do homeo cards, we used to put the character ni on the card if it was a woman. And we've kind of stopped doing that now because I think Hongwanji didn't want to stamp gender at death. A lot of people are gender neutral, you know, the LGBT community. And so we, at least at OCBC, we don't put this ni character on the homeo card for women anymore. But I thought their last name was Shini when I first came. I thought, I don't know, I just thought their name was Shini. But this ni signifies a female nun, a female practitioner of the Buddhist path. And so Eshini, Kakushini, they're represented in these images as devout Buddhist practitioners, Buddhist nuns. My wife is a yoga instructor, and if you're a man and you've mastered yoga and you teach, you're a yogi. But my wife is a yogini. So again, this identifier of ni is very common. It dates all the way back to India. It's nothing unusual. It's not their last name. It's that these were two women who were devoted and very devout Buddhists. In 1211, although Shinran was pardoned, he did not return to Kyoto. He elected to be neither monk nor layman. So he's kind of in no man's land, right? He's not really lay, but he's not really a monk. And I think sometimes our Sangha feels that way, right? You're kind of in between two worlds. You're balancing your secular and your spiritual life within your everyday life. So he lived among the common people. And these are people that didn't know how to read, ate meat, killed animals, tanned leather, all the things that you can never do if you want to realize awakening in the traditional Buddhist path. With his family, he moved to the Kanto region, where he was to spend the next 20 years of his lifetime. During this time, he propagated the teachings of Nembutsu. This is from Jeff Wilson's book, Amida Buddha, or maybe Jeff Wilson's article from Tricycle, Amida Buddha Welcomes All Refugees. So this is another radical thing that Shinran does. It says, studying the teachings of Shinran, it's clear that the persecution, displacement, and poverty he experienced led him to feel solidarity with the neglected, the abused, and the refugee. Oral testimony records an event where he was invited to a feast, but did not sit with the high monks, as was his right. Instead, he went and sat among the commoners and novices, eating with them and treating them as peers, a major breach of medieval social protocol. And then there's one more example I really like. There's this image of Shinran. Shinran Shonin in one of only two portraits painted while he was still alive. This one's entitled Kumagawa no Goei. Sorry for my bad accent. It's called the bearskin portrait. So, he's sitting on animal skin. So this is a very provocative pose that he would do. If you're a monastic, you do not sit on leather. You do not sit on animal skins. So a lot of the things he did really challenged the status quo. I mean, he really lived his beliefs. He was very dynamic and very powerful. And this comes from the chapter of Shinjin in the Collected Works, page 107. In reflecting on the great ocean of Shinjin, I realized that there's no discrimination between noble and humble, or black-robed monks and white-clothed laity. No differentiation between man and woman, old and young, and it is like the medicine that eradicates all poisons. So this is a really powerful message of equality and acceptance. And this is the kind of thing that the LGBTQ community is looking for. It's what the minorities in the United States are looking for, that this idea that there's no distinction between high and low, between rich and poor. We're all equal and we're all accepted as we are. It's a message that really, I think, will resonate in the United States right now with all the division that we have. And then I wanted to share this quote with you. It's my favorite. I thought Sensei was going to read it at his in the beginning. It says that in order that the process be made continuous without end and without interruption, by which those who have been born first guide those who come later, and those who were born later join those who were born before, this is so that the boundless ocean of birth and death be exhausted. So, there's this real sense of gratitude and connectedness in the Dharma being passed down from generation to generation, right? From father to son, father to daughter, daughter to grandchild. This is the importance of Sangha. It's one of my most favorite quotes, and I always read it at a Taikyo service. That, this is why we have memorial services. Without our ancestors, if the founders of the Orange County Buddhist Church had chose to do something else, I never would have been able to come here. So, I really owe a deep debt of gratitude that they made Buddhism available to me. They were working on OCBC before I was born. So I really appreciate that. So next, Honen dies in 1212 in Kyoto, and Shinran goes to Kanto, as we talked about. In 1224, he completes the first version of the Kyogyo Shinsho. So this 1224 and 2024, this is that 800th anniversary of the beginning of the Jodo Shinshu teachings. And so we're kind of combining the 2023 850th of his birth and the 2024 completion of the Kyogyo Shinsho as the 800th anniversary. We're doing this dual 850-800 remembrance. And then in, I love this, 1, 2, 3, 4, I'm a math major. He goes back to Kyoto and he begins to write over 300 wasans. And this is when he begins to start writing in Japanese, in the vernacular. The Kyogyo Shinsho is written in classic Chinese. It's for a different audience. Now he's writing to everyday people. And from his mid 60s until he reaches 90, he really seems to be becoming much deeper, much more intuitive, much more emotional in his writing. And so, these wasans are very powerful. And you could imagine if he was alive today, these might be blogs. These might be text messages. They might be memes on Instagram. He might do a quote of the day that goes out to all the subscribers. So, these are the kind of things you have to reimagine, like what would Shinran do given today's technology, right? These wouldn't be wasans written on bits of paper. They'd be disseminated electronically. And then we will move on. There it is. In 1234, he returns to Kyoto at the age of 60. During the last 30 years of his life, he completed the writing of many religious tracts and verses. His most important work is the Kyogyo Shinsho, Teaching, Practice, Faith, and Realization, which is the foundational doctrine of the Shin Buddhist tradition. And it's hard to read. It needs commentary. So that's another thing we try to do at everydaybuddhist.org. The Sangha needs to read this, but you really need a guide. It needs commentary. So that's what we try to do. We try to introduce Shinran, but we try to give context and commentary so that it's not so daunting. When I was in college, I took English literature, and it started with Beowulf, and it went through to I don't know, Shakespeare. It was pretty hard. I wasn't used to that kind of writing. The words they used were alien to me. The grammar was different, but I had a professor and he helped us understand how to read these texts. And, after 16 weeks, I could read I could read Shakespeare, easy. I got used to the style and the cadence and the language. So, I think that's something we need to do. We can't just say, go read this. We have to teach courses and ease them into it. So Kakushini, his daughter, goes to Kyoto with him and helps take care of him. I didn't realize this. I had to add the numbers together. I think she goes with him when she's 10 years old. So I had assumed she was an adult, but she goes with Shinran at 10 years old and spends the next 30 years with him in Kyoto. So at the end of his life, we see here at 1, 2, 3, 4, he's back at Kyoto with Kakushini. 1256 is the really big traumatic event. Zenron, his son, is left in Kanto, and he's trying to keep the Sangha together after Shinran has moved back to Kyoto. And some scholars feel sorry for Zenron. He's trying to hold it together with the master being gone, and he needs some authority. So he says something like, my dad gave me a special teaching late at night. And that late at night usually signifies an esoteric teaching, which is not something Shinran would ever endorse. And Zenron, I think, did it to get some authority, like my dad's not here, but I'm in charge. And it didn't go over well at all with Shinran. And Zenron also criticized his mother, Eshini, a bit in some of his writings. And I think that really pissed off Shinran. So he was criticizing his mother, and he was kind of making up authority or a lineage that didn't exist in our tradition. And so he disowns his son. This is a major event. It's messy. Families are messy. Shinran had a big family. Things like this happen, and it makes him very human. And then in 1263, at the age of 90, he passes away. So it says in 1263, Shinran passed away at the age of 90, bringing to a close the life of one of the most remarkable figures in Japanese Buddhist history. But we're so lucky, he lived 90 years, which is an incredibly long period of time in that era. And his Kyogo Shinsho, his collected works, we were able to read them today. So, if he died really young and we'd lost these texts, he would be lost to history. So we're really quite lucky that we know as much as we do, and we have as many writings as we do. So I would like to go over a little bit about the relevance of his teaching in today's times. One of the things Shinran talks a lot about is Mappo. And from a Christian background, a lot of times this gets described as end times or Armageddon or, end times in Christianity or the apocalypse. It's not that, it's accessibility. That the idea during Shinran's time is that the Buddha was so long ago that we're losing accessibility to a teacher and to the teachings. And there were also great outbreaks of epidemics during Shinran's time, dead bodies all over the rivers and land. And there were also great battles between the aristocracy and the samurai. So this kind of goes back and forth. The aristocracy was in power, and then in the Kamakura period, it switches over to the samurai. And then, we have the Last Samurai with Tom Cruise, at the end of in the 1860s and 70s, where the samurai are defeated and it switches back to the aristocracy. So this is, I'm not an expert at Japanese history, but there's this ongoing battle between kind of the elites and the samurai. And so it was a very violent time with epidemics. And so this led to a sense that we were cut off from Buddhism, almost like COVID, right? We couldn't go to temple. We couldn't chant together. We just lacked the accessibility necessary to practice the way we normally do. And so in the United States, we went through, many COVID deaths, and around the world, we were all isolated for at least 2 years. We had some memorials, but not too many. Americans tend to always want to be looking forwards, I think. And it was something I noticed that I think as a Buddhist community, the memorials are very important to deal with events like this. And in the United States, we tend to, I don't know, we don't like to dwell on the negative, and I think this is healing. I read an article that said that the United States really needed grief leadership during the COVID epidemic, and we really didn't get it from our religious leaders or from the government, I don't think, or at least not as much as we could have. So if you want to look at what it was like when Shinran was alive and Honen was alive, it was wild. This is a documentary on Netflix called The Age of Samurai, A Battle for Japan. I think Americans think that Japan is this very quiet, peaceful, nature, idyllic, romantic idea. It was a lot of upheaval. I mean, it's like the Middle Ages in Europe. There was just so many clans, so much fighting. It was overwhelming. So, and Buddhist monks and Buddhists were trying to practice during this time, and it was very difficult. So this is the samurai winning over the aristocracy, in the Kamakura periods. And then, around the 1860s, 1870s, the movie Last Samurai with Tom Cruise kind of show the other side, the pendulum swinging back the other way. I'm a little unsure about this movie. There's a kind of a trope of the great white hero, the great white savior. I don't think Tom Cruise plays the great white savior in this movie. He doesn't come in and master kendo and archery and, you know, and become the hero of the movie. He's mainly duck out of water, and he seems to learn a lot from Japanese culture. It's one of my favorite movies. And I kind of thought it had a Jodo Shinshu, a sense to it, because the samurai lord says something very Zen. He says he's going to spend his whole life looking for the perfect cherry blossom. And that's not a wasted life, to find a perfect cherry blossom. At the end of the movie, he gets killed and all the cherry blossoms are falling down. And he goes Jodo Shinshu on us. He realizes that every cherry blossom was perfect. Every one was perfect, just as it is. And then he dies. And so I just find that really interesting. You almost have like a Zen approach when the samurai master was young. And as he's dying on the battlefield, he has an awakening, or Shinjin, that they were all perfect all along, just as they were. And that was his moment of awakening at the end of the film. So, you know, that's a way you can use media to say, see, it's not a foreign idea. This is just basic Buddhism. So I wanted to mention this quick. In the United States, we feel like everything's unraveling. There was even a skit on Saturday Night Live, January 2021, where Kate McKinnon did a skit called on how nothing works in America, and that is just too real now. So I really think people are looking for spiritual support, something to help them with their lives. It's been a rough 3 years, and it may not get any better in the 2024 election. So, you know, I really think there's a need. It's almost we have an obligation to provide this and help others. And that's what we try to do at Everyday Buddhist. We get a lot of feedback like that from our students. The other thing is, I found this on the internet. I don't know if I agree with it all. I hope it's not true, but it's called radical honesty. It says, for young people, millennials, we can no longer assume there will be a future. Human extinction, possibly by 2050. Zoonotic diseases on the rise, future pandemics, student loan debt crisis. When I retired, nobody's going to be able to buy my house. Rising levels of depression and anxiety among teens. Religiously unaffiliated, the nuns, N-O-N-E-S, not N-U-N-S, are on the rise among young adults. So, you know, they're not affiliated with any religious tradition, and yet the millennials are really struggling. They're trying to cobble together 40 hours a week with 3 jobs. They don't have health care. They don't have benefits. They don't have vacation. You know, people are really, really hungry and searching for something. And I really think that we can provide that. And then I wanted to show you a couple more things that is the good side of Jodo Shinshu. One thing Shinran did is he made the importance of place not important. If you can write Namo Amida Butsu on a sheet and hang it on a wall, everywhere is a temple. So it becomes much more egalitarian, much more pedestrian. It makes it available, you know, and we actually suggest to our students at everydaybuddhist.org to create a home altar, to create a spiritual space at home where you could chant the Jusege every morning before you start your day. Purity becomes less important thanks to Shinran. It doesn't matter if you're a butcher or a fisherman. None of those things matter. There's no such thing as a good wave or a bad wave, right? All waves are accepted by the ocean. And Shinran takes this to its logical conclusion. I really like this about Shinran. It may get you to some conclusions you don't like and you may feel uncomfortable with, but Shinran says that's the way it is. That's the way it is. I mean, you may not like the fact that there's not a moral and ethical hierarchy in Jodo Shinshu, but that's the way it is. That's how it is with the waves in the ocean. Every human being's birthright is to be connected to suchness, just as they are from birth. And all you have to do is realize that in your life. You don't have to do anything. That's just how it is. Oh, and this idea of reproducibility. if you can hang a Namo Amida Butsu scroll anywhere, then you can, it's reproducible. You can create religious spaces wherever you carve out room in your life for the practice of Namo Amida Butsu. So I could keep going, but I think maybe we should, it might be a good time for questions. This is kind of a good stopping point. But I think this is one thing that Shinran does. He gives us something to deal with the problems of our time, and he also makes religious practice much more available. The hurdle is very low. Anyone can come, anyone can chant, anyone can say Namo Amida Butsu. And that's much different than other Buddhist traditions. You don't have to be a master. Ministers were just the referees, were just the guides. The actual ritual is being performed by the Sangha. We're just keeping the beat and keeping the pitch. And this is much different than a monastic tradition. And I think in the United States, that would be very appealing. The lack of hierarchy, equality, acceptance, that this is like basic American values within a traditional Japanese Buddhist school.
Thank you, Reverend John. Before we kind of go back to some of the questions from before, I just want to, ask you to, if you could characterize, in Shinran's context, the different ways that we describe, people who are, that like Jodo Shinshu. We have, followers, we have members, we have fellow travelers. Are they all the same, or are there subtle differences in how you think about, followers, members, and fellow travelers?
Maybe there, it might be that they're not, it's a matter of maturity, but I feel like as long as you keep contact and you keep practicing, all those levels are open to you. I've heard like when you run a marathon or you run a race, the lead runner, when he hits a turn, will accelerate as fast as he can, because when the person in second place loses sight or visual contact with the leader, it's very hard to keep running fast. So as long as you keep contact with the Sangha and you keep practicing and you're still at arm's length from the next person, I think it's, like I said, it's a matter of immersion. That, my feeling is, as long as you stick with it and you don't worry about your progress, it comes to you. You just have to keep in the game. So that's kind of how I look at it.
Great, thank you. We had, I think Donna had a question from before. Donna, would you like to pose your question?
Hi, thank you very much. But since then, there are other things that came up. But when John, when you first came to OCB, your Orange County, you said something about, I just wrote it down, activities of the board, because you weren't interested in what was happening at the church, the finance and all that, because you went there for purpose. But today, as a minister, I just wrote down, the board is a group. The minister is one. How should they work together? And just letting you know, I'm a retired teacher. So I was in front of students all day long.
Yeah, I think when I came to OCBC, I had this idea that religion was separate from administration. Like,
Right.
This is like that, and I'm realizing that the people on the board, I think, are profoundly religious, and they're expressing it in a different way. Like their role is financial,
Right.
And so I really respect those people now, and I think they have a depth right? I think they have a real depth in their practice. What we do at OCBC, in terms of the ministers one and the board is many, we kind of try to do the American thing of separation of church and state.
Oh,
The minister is kind of responsible for religious activities, the service template, the order of ritual, the courses we teach. So, and that's kind of a constant. There's a little bit of friction there because, that might cost money. So, like everyday Buddhist, it costs money to run that school, and we do take tuition, and it helps us pay for our editors and our camera and things, but propagation costs money, and we're not really making a profit in the short run. So so we rely a lot of times on donations. So rather than going to the board, we receive donations for that kind of activity. But in general, our board is very supportive, and most of them attend service, and I think we work well together, I think. We're really lucky at OCBC. We don't have contentious board meetings. We don't get in fights. There's no bad blood on the board. And that's something that's amazing to me, because when I was at work, the meetings I went to as a computer programmer were harsh. There's a lot of testosterone and what do they call that? Male dominance going on. But at OCBC, most people are working for a solution, and they don't feel like they identify with their idea. And if it's voted down, they don't get their feelings hurt. And it's much different. I don't know if you realize this, but the way the churches operate is so much different than in an American business environment. It really is amazing.
okay, thank you. I can maybe just take the opportunity, but I saw you take all these quotes from Higashi Hongwanji Mission of Hawaii. It's not that I don't think you could find it in the Ishi Hongwanji books or anything like that, but here in Hawaii, we have a group called HABE, Hawaii Association of International Buddhists, and I was involved in it for quite a length of time, but right now I'm taking a rest. But when I went to Japan and I stood at the Kyoto train station and I looked out, I could see this big sign that talked about, at that time, the changing of the roof for the Goedo, for the Ishi Hongwanji. And then, we made donations, et cetera, et cetera. Then later on, how many years later, I went again to that same spot. And this time I saw the sign on Higashi Hongwanji's roof. You talked about this celebration that's coming up, and I'm going to go to Japan in May. But Higashi Hongwanji is having the same thing.
Yeah.
Right. So I often wonder, when are we going to come together? I know it's a long history, but you don't have to answer that. It's just a comment.
Yeah, it's a good one.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, Alan, would you like to have the floor?
Thank you. Reverend Turner, your presentation is very optimistic. I appreciate all the work that you've done to do this presentation, but in the first at the end of the first session, you talked about the importance of the Sangha, and I've never really understood what that means, because in my own experience, sometimes the Sangha is about barbecue chicken, and it's about making sushi. It's those kinds of things, as opposed to going to service and listening to the Dharma, the practice of Mompo, and and again, maybe I'm, misinterpreting, but for many of our people that come to the temple, it's the association that seems to be more important than the nembutsu, and so I get, and then, my father-in-law was a Hongwanji minister, for which the nembutsu was real. I mean, we heard it whenever you were with him, it was a real spiritual experience to be with Otosan.
Right.
And my experience now, I'm 79 years old and I've been sitting on the board at Hawaii Betsuing for 35 years or something. This is maybe, my hakara is that we're not the kind of sangha that maybe you're experiencing at OCBC. I mean, it's just, it's kind of like there's no religious devotion. It's more, whatever you want to call it, legacy, familiar, family relationships and things like that. So
yeah, I think you bring up a really good point. One thing I should clarify, I think, is that sometimes when I lean into something, I'm talking about balance. So for me, only going, like when I first came here, I only wanted to go to religious things. I didn't want to go to festivals. I didn't really want to do any, I didn't want any new friends. I was super, super serious about the religion. And I needed to balance that, I think, with an appreciation of the Sangha. And I don't think I made that clear. The other thing, another example too, is on everydaybuddhist.org. I tend to emphasize practice over study, but it's not that I think that study isn't really important. It's just that all I did was study. A lot of new people, they study, they know all the vocabulary words, they know all the quotes from Shinran, but they're not really practicing Buddhists. They're learning things. And Reverend Harada always told us we really need both, because practice without study becomes robotic, and study without practice, it has no heart. So I agree with you. Maybe the reason why I appreciate the Sangha so much is that I listen to the Dharma, and I feel like I'm part of a community. And when you're in a group, sometimes there's peer pressure, and also there's modeling. Like in a social environment, I start to notice, how people treat one another and how they talk to one another, and that it's just, I've never seen the way the group operates in a Japanese temple is just much, much different from corporate America. And that really, I just noticed that. But I agree with you. If all you want to do is socialize and play bingo, then yeah, you're losing the balance of the Dharma, giving that more meaning.
But there is like, once a year, I think we have an experience at Diseikai, at our legislative assembly, when those delegates meet, and our opening service, we chant. And that chant, the sound of that chant is what I would consider the essence of the sound of Sangha.
Yep.
But it's rare. It's a rare experience. And I don't know how one develops that over time.
Reverend John, you did mention the importance of language, in terms of sometimes people from a Christian background kind of take our Buddhist terms in certain ways. But I was just thinking about how the word practice is taken in different ways in Buddhism, and might we think of practice as more experience, and kind of doing things that make you feel, like the chanting or gasho, or things that make your body involved.
Yeah.
As opposed to whenever we do use the word practice, we have to kind of, annotate it saying that, oh, we don't do practice in, for enlightenment, all that kind of stuff. But if we just talk about experience, come and, experience the temple like you did when you walked in and just felt, the peace and calm of, the Pure Land.
Yeah.
Maybe that's
Yeah.
a way to channel our thinking.
Yeah, so at Everyday Buddhist, we spend a lot of time on branding and what words we should use, and it's exhausting. But we've been using words like process. It's a process that you're part of. Or we talk about developing new habits. Sometimes I think the Buddha isn't really asking us to change who we are. He's just asking us to develop a different set of habits. We create habits in our life, and most of them are negative. And I think he decided, I'm not really going to change who you are, but I could change the habits you're creating. And so, habits, process, immersive experience, those are the kind of words we try to use.
Okay. And for a final question, I think, Lahaina had a question about, how can Buddhism sound Christian when Buddhism came first?
Yeah, I thought that was a good, hard question. A lot of it, I think, is on the listener side. It's just that if you're a Christian, if you grew up Christian, you do this thing called concept matching. And it's very hard not to do. When you put your hands together in Gassho, I thought we were praying, because that's all I know. And I didn't see a historical Buddha on the altar, and I never heard of Amida before. So that kind of made me nervous. We had an organ. You talk about the Pure Land and Amida Buddha will save me. It sounds, or they'll use the pronoun he, like they'll say his teachings. So I'm like, is it a person? If it's not a person, then it's got to be a God. And so I don't really think it's the fault of us, but we're the ones that want to communicate our message, right? So it's not our fault, but we're really invested in having our message heard appropriately and authentically. So, if you're sending a message to someone and it's garbled, I mean, it's up to us to ungarble it, I think, because, and so, I don't think Jodo Shinshu is Christian in any way, but I have quotes from Buddhist scholars that say, that, Jodo Shinshu is not Buddhist. It's a folk religion based on, salvation after death. And I mean, there's very harsh, Dr. Ken Tanaka has quotes where, he was at a conference once in the bathroom, and another scholar said, oh yeah, you're the Christian Buddhists. So, Reverend Tanaka, there's a quote from a book I have, I was going to show you, where, this German scholar on Buddhism, I mean, he's completely off base, but, they make these sorts of comments. And it's just something to be aware of. And I've had MAs, I've had new MAs who have read things from the collected works who've said, oh my God, I'm freaking out. Like, this doesn't sound Buddhist to me. And so we just need to be aware that this happens, and we need to have an answer for it and just be aware of it.
I think that's part of the mindset, of folks that, especially here in Hawaii, when you're from a legacy, Jodo Shinshu family, you don't realize sometimes that, in America, Christianity came first, so the mindset of most of the people, that, are learning about Jodo Shinshu or Buddhism, comes from their Christianity first mindset. And so, yeah.
Yeah, and sometimes they've had a bad experience with Christianity, and they're looking for something that's totally different. So if anything seems the same, it scares them. And not everything's not going to be different. There's going to be some overlap, but some overlap is normal, but they're just very on edge. It's like having a bad divorce. They've had a bad divorce, and they're having trouble dating.
Well, you have to be aware of, very conservative Christians too, and, how blasphemy and all that sort of stuff, works into the equation. So
Mhm.
you just have to be mindful of where we live,
And the
And
other
it-
thing I wanted to mention is that when I hear the traditional language now, it doesn't trigger me anymore. I've noticed, I mean, this has been 25 years, but when I hear the quotes that Sensei read before we started, that it didn't trigger me because I've developed my ear. I understand the context. I know what we're talking about. And I'm finally starting to appreciate a lot of these. The other thing about these quotes from Shinran too, is they're often given out of context. And I think it's always hard to understand something. You go into this giant work, the Kyogo Shinsho, and you pull out 3 sentences and then you give it to someone, that's a hard thing to do.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Reverend Turner, for your your perspectives and your intelligence, to help us, understand these things. Alan, I'm going to move on because we're running out of time, to give a short update on the Hawaii Minister Assistant, or we call it Minister Lay Assistant, program. And then Reverend Umatani will be, closing, the session and after me. So I'll just take about, 3 to 5 minutes, to, talk about okay. The Hawaii Minister Lay Assistant Program is kind of, we're rebooting it, for 2023. It really consists of these 3 levels. The first level is the Minister Lay Assistant level. Then there's a certified Minister Lay Assistant step. And then there's a certified Minister Lay Assistant with Tokudo ordination. The original MLA, I think of it now as a project, that we started in about 2010, and it ran through last year, and it was primarily a temple-based, type of a program, and the main thing that occurred was the annual retreat. What we're aiming for, for 2023 and beyond, is one that is, more designed by the MTC, the Ministerial Training Committee, and the BSC Program Committee, and it, uses an approved Shin ministry policy, that is something that the ministers have worked on for many years, and finally it's in a good enough shape that it provides a real guidance to where the ministry is headed for in Hawaii. And then there's also the the training guide that's been developed, and it's just coming out now, as well as the MLA educator guide. And so these are real references, that are available, for the training, of especially our ministers' assistants. In addition to that, there's a thing that is in the works, basically, from Kyoto, called the Kyofan A, and there's actually a B curriculum also, but it's really, again, a curriculum of how to do an integrated teaching approach from Shakyamuni through Shinran. The BSC has been working on a translation, of it, and we have a preliminary, version that's available here in Hawaii, that it can again serve as, kind of the basis for, how we look at the Dharma, and how do we try to communicate, these things. I think it follows along very nicely with everyday Buddhists. And so those are, kind of a whole new set of resources that we have, that we can, use in our next annual retreat in October. Will be kind of a revamped one and redesigned one. So keep your eyes out for that. The excuse me, the weekend is October 7th and 8th. Again, that takes your resident minister to sponsor you for that. In addition, we're beginning to work, these committees are beginning to work on district level mini retreats. There's one that's kind of being worked on for the Big Island at the moment. So hopefully in 23 and 24, as well as, on top of the annual retreat, there'll be district level mini retreats, that help to, train in ritual and in, Dharma education. The, kind of what do we want a minister lay assistant, to be? It's, this idea of a spiritual volunteer. We know that we have volunteers to do, spring bazaars and bone dances and, cleaning the temple. But, the minister lay assistant, focuses in on, kind of like the spiritual nature, of what a person can do, with adequate training. And this should, be a path, just like Reverend Turner was talking about, how to enrich your own spiritual journey. It's not all about, just, working and putting in hours in helping the minister, but it's also about your own spiritual journey and becoming a real, hand-in-hand fellow traveler with your minister, on how to share the Dharma at your temple. And, and again, just like in BCA, there's no requirement to advance. You can, stay where you're comfortable. So essentially, minister's assistants, minister lay assistants, serve as a bridge, from, kind of, members and interested followers, to the teachings and values of Jodo Shinshu. Again, per the policy of the Mission of Hawaii, becoming a minister lay assistants by invitation only, just like John was talking about in on the mainland, and this is a excerpt directly from the policy, that the resident minister tries to spot out those that are the right fit, and they invite that person to join. So when you're ready, consider coming to learn rituals, traditions, and teachings of Shin Buddhism so you can share it, with others. So if you want to know more about, kind of the program, you can reach out, to myself or Reverend Umatani, and we'll, help you learn it. Okay. So I will now turn it over to Reverend Umatani for the final words.
Okay, thank you, Dexter. Okay, so thank you very much, Reverend John Turner, for this wonderful presentation this morning on the topic of the fellow travelers in Shin Buddhism. And I also like to thank Caroline Uchiyama and Dexter for planning this seminar and making all the arrangements. And as we learned today, there's a unique relationship, spiritual connection, and a sense of brotherhood among those who walk the path of Nembutsu. And so as a closing reflection, I kind of like to share what I learned when I became a Kaikyoshi minister. This is what I learned from my boss at the Hongwanji International Center. He talked about the word Kaikyoshi. And as some of you may know, Kaikyoshi is a title for ministers given by the Jodo Shinshu Hongwanji-ha, the headquarters in Kyoto. And Kaikyoshi ministers are dispatched to the overseas countries, such as BCA, mainland, Canada, South America, and Hawaii. And they dedicate their lives to the spread of Jodo Shinshu teachings in overseas countries. And my boss taught me that the way we write kanji of Kaikyoshi, kai means open, spread, or transmit, and kyo means teaching or dharma. And shi, there are two ways to write kanji. The first one means teacher or master, and second one means messenger. And my boss mentioned that in the Jodo Shinshu tradition, Kaikyoshi, as you can see, we use the second Chinese character. So Kaikyoshi can be translated as a messenger who transmits the teaching of Nembutsu and encourages people to take refuge in Amida Buddha. So the question is, why don't we use the kanji for master, but use the word kanji of messenger? So I'd like to share some of the words that Shinran Shonin said. Shinran Shonin said, "For myself, Shinran, I do not have even a single disciple. For if I brought people to say the Nembutsu through my own efforts, then they might be my disciples. But it is indeed preposterous to call persons my disciples when they say the Nembutsu, having received the working of Amida." So there were many people who deeply revered Shinran Shonin as their teacher, and some people even thought that Shinran Shonin as an embodiment of Amida Buddha. However, Shinran Shonin treated all those people, all those followers, as co-learners of the Dharma and co-travelers of the path to the Pure Land. Shinran Shonin had no doubt that every Nembutsu practitioner was fundamentally Amida's child and disciple who was nurtured by the primal vow to become a Nembutsu practitioner. It is fundamentally Amida's primal vow that is making us say the Nembutsu. For that reason, Shinran Shonin said, "For myself, I do not have even a single disciple." Shinran Shonin also said, "I'm only speaking as the Tathagata's representative. I do not propagate any new Dharma at all. I entrust myself to the Tathagata's Dharma and simply teach that to others. Besides that, what do I teach that I would speak of having disciples?" And here's the conversation between Rennyo Shonin and his disciple, Hokyobo Junsei. Rennyo Shonin said, "Hokyo and I are brothers." And Hokyo replied, "That is more than I deserve." Then Rennyo Shonin said, "If Shinjin is established, those who are born in the Pure Land first are elder brothers, and those who are born afterwards are younger brothers. Therefore, Hokyo and I are brothers. It is said that if we share the Buddha's benevolence with each other, we attain the same Shinjin. Accordingly, all throughout the world are brothers." It's from Rennyo Shonin's Kikigaki, the correction of his messages. Rennyo Shonin also said, to get together, sit around, and talk to each other regardless of different rank and social status is consistent with Shinran Shonin's remark. Within the four C's, those who share the same faith are all brothers. So, whether as clergy or as laity, we are all unconditionally embraced and affirmed by Amida. So together, we devote our lives to listening to and hearing the call of Amida Buddha through Namo Amida Butsu. With a sense of joy and gratitude for encountering the Dharma, we then share with our fellow travelers how much Amida's wisdom and compassion inspire and enrich our lives. And I'd like to end my closing remark by sharing what Reverend Jitsuen Kakehashi wrote. Thus, Nembutsu practitioners are expected to recognize fellow practitioners as the Tathagata's children, as their own brothers and sisters, and as co-learners of the Pure Land Way, and to treat and associate with each other with deep respect and friendship. In this way, the Nembutsu practitioners of Jodo Shinshu are first and foremost listeners of the Dharma. As the Buddha's disciples, they should always think of their indebtedness to the Buddha and the Pure Land masters, and never position themselves as a teacher and act arrogantly, so that respecting and caring for each other, they all can travel together toward the Pure Land. With that, I close my closing remarks. And once again, thank you everyone for attending the 2023 BSC Spring Session. Namanda. Nama.
Thank you, Reverend Omikani. And thank you for everyone for sharing your morning with us. And we hope that the session has given you better insight into Shinran's life and journey as we all take as fellow travelers. We had a couple of questions in the end here that were not answered. So if you guys want to stay on after we finish our session here, Reverend John has agreed to stay on and answer some of those questions. But let us express appreciation for this opportunity to gather, learn, and help each other along the Dharma path by joining in the Nembutsu led by Reverend Bishop Eric Matsumoto.
I may ask everyone to please join me in Anjali Gasho and in awareness, joy, and gratitude of great wisdom and compassion, illuminating, nurturing, guiding, and embracing us. Please join me to recite Namo Amida Butsu, the Buddha's name, which I call in gratitude, in response to Namo Amida Butsu, the Buddha's name that calls me to entrust. Namo Amida Butsu.
Namo Amida
Namo Amida Butsu.
Namo Amida Butsu.
Namo Amida Butsu.
Namo Amida Butsu.
Entrusting in all-inclusive wisdom and all-embracing compassion. Namanda. Nama.
Thank you, Bishop. Just one announcement. For your information, the 2023 summer session has been moved from the listing on the Honpa calendar. The speaker will be Reverend Takashi Miyaji, and it will be held from June 5th through 9th at 6 to 8 p.m. at the Buddhist Study Center and online. This will be a hybrid session. Due to circumstances beyond our control, there will be no Neighbor Island sessions. More information will be forthcoming. Once again, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the committee and also all of you for joining us this morning. If you'd like to stay and learn a little bit about the Everyday Buddhist program, you can stay online. And if not, you can drop off, and we hope to see you at one of our future sessions. Thank you very much for joining us.